need you guys to strap in. I need you guys to lock in, okay? Lock in and understand what's about to happen here. We are about to rank many controllers from throughout history. This is important because A, everyone grew up with all sorts of different games and systems, so their nostalgic opinions might be different than my nostalgic opinions, which is why I'm going to shit on all of your guys' favorite controllers. Or maybe I'll like all of them. Who knows? The first one we have to start with, since Kelly so eloquently asked us to do this, you gotta start with the PS1, the classic controller. Everyone's favorite, right? No thumbsticks or anything. It's just there. It's vibing. This controller was pretty mid. This controller without the thumbsticks was not very good. It needed it pretty bad. A lot of games did not control very well without the thumbsticks. It's this controller was pretty meh. Not a great time. It wasn't terrible. Like, it didn't feel bad in your hands, but it just felt like something was missing, you know? So that's a C tier for sure. Now, when it got thumbsticks, that's A tier. When it got thumbsticks, that controller felt great, okay? It felt good in your hands. It was really easy to button mash. The buttons were always so easy. I remember playing Final Fantasy VIII with that controller and just Guardian Forces getting charged up with the boost thing. Just it was big time. PS2 controller, very similar to the PS1 controller. Honestly, it's kind of the same tier for me. They're both A tier. They're both great controllers. They feel great. I wouldn't say one is necessarily like way better than the other. They feel very similar. All the games I played on PS2, I felt like the controller controlled fine for them. Playing stuff like Budokai and Star Wars Battlefront and whatnot, like whether it was fighting games or shooter games or whatever, it all felt fine. So those are easily both, I feel like, A tier. Just both felt great. If we're talking about the PS3, I'm going to be honest, I didn't play the PS3 a lot. I got to play it a bit here and there at a buddy's house, but I never owned a PS3. So I didn't get to use the PS3 controller a ton. From my experience with it, it was fine. I felt like for the games that were coming out, like I felt like there was a bigger emphasis in the PS3 for games like Call of Duty and these other shooter games. And I felt like I didn't love how it felt with the thumbsticks on the PS3. I don't know if it necessarily deserves to be in like B tier or if it should be on the same tier. Like personally, I mean, it feels very similar to the PS2 controller. There's not a huge difference, I feel like. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt and give it A tier. And then I'm gonna have to make a row here. Add row below. I'm gonna have to make a row here for ones I've never actually used. Which brings me to the PS4 controller. I've never used it. I don't know. I really don't know how that feels for gaming. I think I've held one maybe like 3 times, but I've never really used it. So I don't love the like middle screen thing compared to like the start select middle thing, but I just can't rank it. I've never used it enough to be able to rank it. I'm assuming if I used it more, it would probably end up like right up there with like the B A tier, but I really never used it. The old chonker, the old Xbox chonker controller, it's not great. It's really not great. It's huge. This controller is massive. Even as an adult, this thing is hard to hold. It doesn't feel good. And the buttons were kind of a weird shape. It was just a really weird controller. I enjoyed using it back in the day because it was, it just felt new and different or whatever. But like in general, it's not a great controller. There's a reason a lot of players had to like claw to try to press buttons in like Halo 2 and stuff. Because it's just like there's just so much to try to do on this gargantuan controller. So it just didn't feel very good. And on top of that, I will say the D-pad on it felt like shit. I hated the D-pad on the original Xbox controller. Hated it. This one, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever actually used this controller. The S-Type, I don't know if I've ever actually gotten to use this. I can't remember. I feel like I have. I feel like maybe I've gotten to use one at one point. I'm going to have to put it in never used, though. I don't know if I've ever used it enough to actually rank it. I might have gotten to use it like once or twice, but I only really remember using the original Xbox controllers. When I first got to use an original Xbox controller, I just remember feeling like it felt like this, okay? It felt like I was holding this. It was so hard to hold, dude. The next controller, I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and waste your time. It's such an obvious S tier. The Xbox 360 controller was, I mean, it just felt so good, dude. From the thumbsticks to the buttons to the bumpers and triggers. I mean, it just, every button felt good on the Xbox 360 controller. It fit well in your hands. It just was a really, really nice controller. Every Xbox 360 controller I used was great, with the exception of like some Afterglow controllers that were like, I mean, if you guys have ever used an Afterglow controller, you'll know the sticks don't feel great. They're kind of small and they kind of hurt your thumbs, but they looked cool and they were cheap. So you had to kind of just roll with it sometimes. Xbox One controller, I feel like has some mixed feelings overall. For me personally, it's easily A tier. It's not quite as good as the 360 controller, but I like the Xbox One controller. It feels good. I got it right here. It feels good. It's not quite as comfortable to use as a 360 controller, but I felt like the sticks have always felt good. The face buttons, for the most part, feel okay. They wear out pretty quickly, and didn't have as satisfying as a press down as a 360. It still is a good controller. It still feels good, and it works really well for all sorts of games beyond like just like shooters and whatnot. So it's a good controller. I like it. It's comfortable, just not quite as good as the 360. I don't know if I ever actually got to use a Sega Genesis controller, but I'm pretty sure the Saturn I got to use a little bit. The Sega Saturn controller, I feel like I enjoyed using back in the day. It doesn't give you a lot of hand support. That was kind of the issue with a lot of these old controllers, is like, they didn't feel great to hold necessarily, but they usually worked really well for the games they were made for. The Sega Saturn, I didn't get to use a ton. So it's a little hard for me to rank. I enjoyed it, but not that much. I'll put it over the original Xbox controller, but I didn't really love it that much more. It didn't feel like great in my hands, but it felt better than these two. So for now, I'll put it in C tier. It might move up to B tier, but I remember playing at like a friend's house a few times with the Sega Saturn controller, and it was fine. Just not like, didn't feel great. Dreamcast controller. I mean, look, if you thought the Xbox controller was hard to use, let me tell you, the Dreamcast controller, so easy. Literally S tier controller. Nothing feels better than a literal rocket ship in your hands. It's D tier. It's D tier. Okay, I'm done memeing. This controller is terrible. Like, look at it. You got a stick on one side, you got buttons on the other, and then this D-pad just kind of hanging out there. And then all of this space to just hold this giant clunker of like a frisbee rock in your hands. It's too much, dude. I hated this controller. Again, I didn't get to use it a ton, but the couple of times I did, I hated it. I didn't understand. It was just so clunky. Shit reminds me of the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy controller they gave Grim. For real though, this is the Dreamcast controller. Like, good luck. Here's just a giant jellyfish to hold in your hands. Good luck, have fun. Original NES controller was fine. This is serviceably B tier. Yes, it was small, but for the games way back on the NES, it worked fine. You really only needed a couple buttons. It was easy to like button mash because it was very small, and like you could just you could fling it around pretty easily. The games were so simple back then. They were so simple, so you didn't really need much on the controller. It felt fine. The corners, the kind of jagged corners didn't feel great, which is why it kind of goes down to this B tier, where it's just kind of like, it didn't feel always super comfortable to hold. But with only a couple of buttons, you didn't even like really need your whole hands to hold it, you know? So it was a serviceable controller for its time. Obviously could have been better, but that's why they kept improving throughout the years. So, okay, what came next? Super Nintendo, right? Super Nintendo. This was a really nice controller. I feel conflicted because I liked the Super Nintendo controller, but with 4 buttons, it felt kind of small. You thought it felt good, Kelly? I don't know. I didn't get to play a ton of SNES, but I did play enough definitely to rank it, similar to the NES. I played enough to be able to rank it. Maybe if I played more SNES growing up, maybe I'd have more of an attachment to it. I'll give it an A. I mean, it's not like I really disliked it. At the time, it didn't really feel too small. The buttons felt good. The buttons definitely felt good to press. I'll say that. The buttons felt good. The 4 face buttons felt good, and it worked really well for games like Mega Man, where you had to be able to like jump and charge at the same time. Whereas like nowadays, trying to play Mega Man with a different controller is a lot harder. So, I mean, it definitely did good for the console it was on. Same thing with like running and jumping with Mario. It was a pretty good controller for its console, and it didn't feel bad. So I'll give it A. I'll give it A. You guys have convinced me. I'll give it A. N64. Look, how do I talk about the N64 controller? I love the N64 controller, and I also hate the N64 controller. I love it, but it's also kind of shit. I don't know who designed this and said, yeah, people have 3 hands. This is a great idea. This is so easy for them to just, I'll just move my thumb way up here to press safe button, you know, face buttons. Like, okay, yeah, D-pad. And it's just, there's too many things they tried to do with this controller. It's not very good. I really, really hate to do this, but it is a D tier controller. It's above the Dreamcast, but this controller kind of sucks. Like, I love it in my heart, but objectively, it just doesn't work, man. I know. D tier is it's extreme, but I'm telling you, this thing is so hard to use. It's just not a great controller. If you played like shooters, if you played something like GoldenEye with that, you know the aiming, terrible. It's terrible, and it hurt my hands. And also, okay, my biggest fucking gripe with these controllers, I'm grabbing mine actually. The thumbstick would get so loose. It would drive me crazy. The stick drift on these things was terrible. You literally, it would just all the time. The moment you use this controller for like a week, all of a sudden your thumbstick is just like a fucking nipple here, just going nuts. It drove me crazy. Actually drove me crazy. Not to mention the cords. I didn't even talk about the cords. These cords also were terrible. You tell me, how do I hold this? How did you guys hold it? I always held it like this. Okay, I held it like this. Finger on the back. Okay, I held it like this. Am I supposed to hold it like this? Do I hold it in claw with both hands so I can press the thumbstick? What do you think? What do you do? Oh, and then I gotta use my pinky to hit the thing on the back. Is this a comfortable controller, chat? Yeah, we need to pick me up. We need to pick me up. GameCube, S tier. Duh. Hello. Easy S tier. Again, not gonna waste your time. GameCube controller was a huge improvement. Turning the C stick buttons, turning the yellow buttons on the controller of the N64 into a stick was actual 5-head. Easy S tier, okay? Easy S tier. You look at this thing. It feels so good, dude. It feels so good. In fact, now that I think about it, I think the GameCube controller is why I hold my Xbox controllers the way I do. Because on this controller, I didn't need 2 fingers up here. I didn't need 2 fingers up here. I only needed 1. And I think that's why I do the same thing with my Xbox controllers. I hold my Xbox controllers like this. This is why I lose all my melee fights. But like, I don't use 2 fingers up here. I only use 1 and then just shift when I need to. The controller feels great. These feel super satisfying. These feel so good to press, dude. The L and R buttons feel good. This controller is like 20 years old, still feels great. The stick drift on this, notice, I can shake and the stick doesn't fucking move. It doesn't move. I have to actually press on it to move it. Beautiful design, okay? C-stick, same way. I have to use it. I have to press it to make it move. Now, I will say the D-pad on this is dog shit. It's literally just a tiny itty-bitty D-pad that hurts my thumb to press because it just feels like it's getting stabbed. But everything else felt great. The Wii controller. This one's so hard to talk about compared to the rest of these because it's just so different. It's so different compared to the rest. I mean, like, the Wii controller was its own beast. I feel like if I'm judging it based on how well it worked for the console, it was 4. It did fine. It was a solid, basically remote control that you could use to play video games, I suppose, with a nunchuck that attached to it. Still felt kind of awkward, though. You played Wii with your GameCube controller? That's honestly probably the way to do it. My Wii experiences were all in different places. Like, there was like a local rec center that had one, so I played it there. I got to play it at friends' houses and family members' houses, but I didn't really get to like play it a lot on my own. But I definitely use these controllers plenty, and let me tell you, they are serviceable. I mean, they're, for the console that they're made for, they're serviceable. I don't really love them, but they're not bad. I mean, really the only issues I had with controllers were the fact that, you know, it's motion controls, and motion controls are really awkward. The Wii U, listen, okay? Wii U, it's a controller and also a console, okay? It's its own thing. I'm gonna tell you, I never really liked it. I really did not like that the Wii U was this giant thing I held in my lap and looked at that screen instead of the big screen. I really did not like the Wii U as an idea, as a thing. I thought it was so weird. And maybe I just didn't experience enough of it, but like, I just didn't like, I just, once I got like more of a feel for it, I could kind of understand it, but like, I just didn't like that I had to hold this big clunky thing. I don't know. Couldn't you put the Wii U on a big screen though through HDMI or another? I mean, you could, but there were certain games where like, you had to, you could like have the Wii hooked up or whatever and the Wii U hooked up to that and then like, use it like that, but you still had to like look at the screen for like certain things. I don't know. It was just awkward. It just was awkward and big. I'm not an expert on the Wii U. I didn't get to play it nearly as much as most of these other ones, but my experience with it was not a very positive one. Though I mean, I guess it's probably better than the N64 controller, right? Like, I mean, I guess I'll put it over that because at least you don't have to hold the controller with 3 hands. The last two we have are the Switch controllers. So I guess the Joy-Cons came first, right? Or I guess probably around the same time. The Joy-Cons are pretty mid. I'm not gonna lie. The Joy-Cons are not bad. They're kind of on a similar tier to the Wii controller for me. They're not bad. They're kind of cheap. They're kind of flimsy. They break pretty easily, but the buttons feel good on it. The buttons feel good, and the thumbsticks feel pretty good. And if you use it in like the docked mode, if you use it in the Joy-Cons in the little like thing that it comes with, if you use it with like this thing, it feels a lot better for me personally with my, I guess, bigger hands. A little fucking subtle flex, I guess. I don't know. Alone, just the Joy-Cons in my hands, they're not the worst, not the best. Joy-Cons are fine, just not great one way or the other. Just kind of middle of the tier for me. The Nintendo Switch like Pro controller, I guess is what you'd call this, I think feels good. That's a pretty easy A tier for me. The Pro controller I've used multiple times. It feels good. The face buttons, the X, B, A, Y buttons could be a little better, but overall the controller feels very similar to an Xbox controller, which, I mean, makes that really easy. If you have a similar design and feel to an Xbox controller, I'm probably going to enjoy your controller. That's really all there is to it. So, I mean, it's a pretty easy A tier for me. I've enjoyed using it every time. Not as much as these two absolute Giga Chads up in S tier, but it's a very, very solid controller. So, and I guess that does it for the tier list. That's all the controllers on this. I mean, that went pretty quick overall.